Probably not, but that's fine. Okay, so suboccipital muscles. We have the rectus, capitis, posterior, minor. The origin is C1, the posterior tubercle. It inserts at the occipital bone, the inner third of the inferior nuchal line. Innervation is caused by the posterior ramus of C1 at the suboccipital nerve, and the action unilaterally, it rotates the head to the same side, and bilaterally, it extends the head. Next is the rectus capitis posterior major, which originates from C2, the spinous process, inserts at the occipital bone, the middle third of the inferior nuchal line. Innervation done by the posterior ramus of C1, suboccipital nerve. The action unilaterally, it rotates head to the same side, bilaterally it extends head. Then we have Obliqus capitis inferior. The origin is C2, the spinous process, and the insertion is C1, the transverse process. It is innervated by the posterior ramus of C1, the suboccipital nerve. The action unilaterally, it tilts that to the same side and rotates it to the opposite side, and bilaterally it extends the head. Finally, we have the Obliqus capitis superior, which originates from C1, the transverse process, and inserts at the occipital bone above insertion of rectus capitis posterior major. It is innervated by the posterior ramus of C1, the suboccipital nerve, and the actions unilaterally, it tilts the head to the same side and rotates it to the opposite side, and bilaterally it extends the head. So the synergists of the cervical spine. For flexion, you have the sternocleidomastoid, anterior scalene, longus capitis, and longus coli. For extension, you have the trapezius, the upper fibers, levator scapula, splenius capitis, splenius cervicis, rectus capitis posterior major, rectus capitis posterior minor, oblique capitis superior, semispinalis capitis, longissimus capitis, longissimus cervicis, iliocostalis cervicis, multifidi, rotaris, intertransversari, and the interspinalis. On to rotation. Rotation unilaterally to the same side. Levator scapula, splenius capitis, splenius cervicis, rectus capitis posterior major, oblique capitis inferior, longus coli, longus capitis, longissimus capitis, longissimus cervicis, iliocostalis cervicis. Then for rotation unilaterally to the opposite sides, you have the trapezius, upper fibers, the sternocleidomastoid, anterior scalene, middle scalene, posterior scalene, multifidi, rotators. And then lateral flexion unilaterally to the same side. The trapezius, upper fibers, the levator scapula, sternocleidomastoid, anterior scalene with ribs fixed, middle scalene with ribs fixed, posterior scalene with ribs fixed, splenius capitis, splenius cervicis, longus capitis, longus coli, longissimus capitis, longissimus cervicis, iliocostalis cervicis, obliquus capitis superior. All right, and now we're on to the